So we are moving towards the Shavuot festival, the Shavuot festival, the festival of weeks, at the culmination of the 7 weeks of the counting that the Jewish nation count down towards the receiving of the Torah. The receiving of the Torah is an activity and is an event, which on the one hand was a one-time event, on the other hand is a continuous event, a one point in time for the nation, for the Jewish nation, when they came to the Mount Sinai and they received their constitution, they received their covenant with Hashem, bound by rules and philosophies and deep connective perfection within ideas that comes from God himself, and therefore automatically, axiomatically, they have an infinite depth and a state of perfection with a capital P that enhances a person, and the more they dwell in it. So even though it was a one-time event, everything in a spiritual realm repeats itself in a yearly life cycle. And individually, the nation Israel in each generation, in each year, receives anew the Torah at the time of Shavous. That connecting point of receiving the Torah anew means that they enjoy a relationship of revelation with God that's an infinite sense, because the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai, the giving of the Torah on the Mount Sinai, was an event that co-joined the spiritual realms to the physical realms. This is the time when God came down to the Jewish nation and revealed himself on the mountain, albeit through his messenger Moses, but there was a recognition and a vision that was given to the entire Jewish nation, and the 10 Commandments was given to the entire Jewish nation with a philosophy and with a motivation that they spread it to the rest of the world. So it's not just something which affected the Jewish nation, it affects and in an ongoing sense has affected the world at large. And that's easy to see and easy to understand just by virtue of thinking and understanding how the Jewish nation has given to the rest of the world. There's a symbolic representation of the activity that happened in the time of the receiving of the Torah. And that symbolic representation is represented by what happened and what happens in the temple. So at the time when there was the physical temple, and when the Jews were traveling in with their mobile mikdash, with their mobile sanctuary, or in the beginnings of the nation Israel, when there was the mobile sanctuary that moved from the early cities where it was till the base of Mikdash, till the temple was established in its final place, being Jerusalem. there is an activity that happens in between the two periods, that is the periods between Pesach and Shavuot. And it's interesting to note that the two extremes between the two extremes of the period, that is the beginning of the 49-day Spirit omer period, starts with one type of korban, one type of offering that happens in the Beis Hamikdash, and it ends off in the festival of Shavuos, in the festival of weeks, at the end of the Spirit omer period, with another type of offering to Hashem. By examining those two offerings, we can get an inkling to what is a conceptual basis and an understanding of the connection of the Jewish nation and God's response to the people through those offerings. Now, it's been discussed before, perhaps we've talked about it in our different classes at some point, but I'm going to zero in on some aspects of it, which hopefully give us a deeper insight into aspects which relate to it. So the offering which is activated in the Pesach period is the omer offering, and that's based on the barley harvest that happens at that period, in that period of time. The other end, at the end of the period, there is an offering which is called the shtei lechem, meaning the two loaves of bread. This is from the class of offerings which are grain-based offerings, and therefore under the terminology of a korban mincha, which essentially means a grain-based offering, and there were some various types that were done. It was made as part of synchronized. It was part of the Bikurim, the first produce yielding offering. So the omer at the beginning of the cycle is the first production of the barley harvest, which is the first harvest which comes through on an agricultural base, and the end of that period is the shtei lechem, the two breads, a wheat-based offering, which is the beginning of the wheat-based grain cycle. So from the agricultural point of view, when the wheat was at its due point and it's in its first harvesting periods, and these were the two offerings. Now we need to dig deeper in understanding the significance of those two offerings. The barley one has been understood as a beginning of the cycle of the Spirit omer. Barley considered as not as the food or fodder for animals. Wheat is considered a better harvest and considered a food for the human being. And based on that, we can learn and understand the teaching. One of the ideas that is expressed about that is that barley is the beginnings of intellectualization, the beginnings of the process of understanding something. So you start with the point of view of a basic and very natural animal view of the world, and the wheat is considered a viewpoint and an approach of a more human-based understanding of something, and hence because wheat is the food, because it needs to be processed and made into a fine food. It's a food for the humans, and the human is more the intellectual species, and therefore on the spectrum of analysis, on the spectrum of understanding, on the spectrum of deep thought, the wheat harvest is considered the approach of the human being coming from the intellect. At first glance, we understand, or the first approach of understanding is that the Shavous omer period is this period of time that when we refine ourselves and refine our connection point to godliness, which then culminates at the Shavous period, and we work through our different animalistic approaches till we come to a more refined approach of connecting God. That is a classical understanding, classical from the point of view of classical, deep within the ethical and the mystical realms of understanding this period of time. So the agricultural approach is a very agricultural vision of understanding of what happened in Israel. Taking it to that next level of the refinement of the connection to godliness is a more mystical level approach, mapping that time period into one's personal development as an individual, development of the nation as well, and then a higher point, an individual's connection to godliness. We can further understand the connective point of this period if we examine a verse of the prophets, which is connected to this end period of time. So we are aware that in the synagogue service, we read passages of the Torah as the way that the Torah has been split up for every week of the Jewish year. It is deliberate that we find that Parshas Bamidbar, the weekly reading, which talks about when the Jews come to Mount Sinai, or at least discusses it mentions Mount Sinai. The Jews came into the wilderness. Parshas Bamidbar is always read prior to the festival of Shavuos, so it has an inherent connection to Shavuos. Further, we know that in the times of the persecutions in Israel, in the biblical times, when the authorities at the time did not allow Torah teaching to be publicized, one of the things that they did was to remind the populace about the content of the portion of the week. They found a portion in the prophets which had a similar line of thought. The Haftorah, that's called the Haftorah. So the Haftorah for the week, which is connected to Bamidbar, which is read at prior to Shavuos, is a reading from Hosea, and at the end of that passage, there's beautiful lines, and we're going to examine those lines and then understand them in connection to the parsha, and it'll actually illuminate us in relationship to the parsha. At the end of that Haftorah, the Haftorah itself speaks about the love of God to the Jewish people, which is actually, in fact, one of the hidden messages in the parsha that we read before Shavuos, Parshas Bamidbar, because in Parshas Bamidbar introduces a command to count the Jewish people, and Rashi, our foremost commentator, asks the question, why is there a count here? And it's expressed because this is the way when a person loves something, he counts them and wants to know how many of them that he's got, and that shows his connective point in this. So the idea of the counting is the idea of an expression of love. So also that Haftorah is an expression of love of Hashem to the Jewish people. The last lines, that is so they start to read Isaiah 2, chapter 2, and the verses of the last ones from 20 to 22 discuss how Hashem's made a covenant with all the creations in the world and Hashem. And it discusses that it says that he makes he makes a betrothal. Hashem makes a betrothal with the Jewish people. We, in fact, understand, and much is brought in the Midrashim, that the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai is the wedding between God and the Bnei Yisrael. So these last lines, which discuss a betrothal between Hashem and the Jewish people, fits in quite strongly to that idea. So if we will see that we can map that idea into the period of time of Shavous omer, beginning with Pesach to the Shavous period. What was the Pesach period? The Pesach period was that when Hashem took us out from Egypt, he redeemed us from this country, redeemed his people who were bound in slavery, and took them out as the start of a new beginning, a birth of a nation. And in fact, this connection point, that the going out of Egypt has to culminate and has to conclude its ultimate objective, has already been expressed way beforehand in the narrative. At the beginning of Exodus, in the beginning of Shavous, when Hashem appears to Moses at the burning bush and gives him his mission for life, to take out the Jewish people, when he sees the burning bush and he communicates with Hashem via this activity of seeing a natural but supernatural event. Hashem communicates with him and tells him that his mission is to take out the Jewish people, but he also tells him that there is a purpose for it. He tells him that when you will take the people out of Egypt, they will worship God on this mountain. They will come back here, and they will culminate in a reception of a covenant of receiving the Torah. So we find that the Torah purpose for the burning bush and Moses' job starts at the motivation of coming out of Egypt, the revelation at the burning bush, which is the beginning of the redemption period, which is then the Pesach period, for its culmination at the giving of the Torah. So we see that there's the linkage between the beginning of the period to the end period. We see further connection points. And in fact, Pesach and Shavous are considered one as an extension of the other. Shavous is considered the culmination of Pesach. Pesach is seen as the beginning of it. So in fact, they're seen as an extension, one of the other. This idea can be seen in the verse in those verses, which we are at the end of, which are at the end of the Haftorah, the Hosea passage, Hosea 21, where it says, where Hashem says in the prophecy via Isaiah, tell them, I will be betrothed to you forever. V'arastechli le'elam. I will be connected, betrothed to you le'elam, which means forever. This idea that the Kedushin means the first stage of marriage, loosely translated as engagement, but for us, but in the Jewish sense, it's not what we call an engagement today, but is in fact the beginning period of the betrothal, where the chosen and kala, where the bride and bridegroom connect together, not in a physical sense, but connect together in a bond that is now the start of their marriage, to be completed at the chuppah, at the chuppah ceremony, which can be separated by hours, can be separated by days, or even a year. In older times, they used to have a much longer period of time, but the connection was a full-bound connection. So the expression of arasticha, I will betroth you, is the expression of that I'll connect to you, and that is what we do when we eat matzahs on Pesach. We connect to Hashem with a betrothal we connect to Hashem with the betrothal of verse 22, which continues and says, "Va'arastechli be'emunah." I have connected to you with faith, which is what the Jews had at the time of going out of Egypt. They were going into the wilderness to a future unknown, without food, without water, based on the faith that they had in Hashem. So the words of arastichli be'emunah means that the Jewish nation was born as a nation based on the faith to Hashem, which connects to a deeper idea within Pesach. When we talk about the matzahs of Pesach, we talk about the food of faith. When we eat matzahs, we incorporate in our body food, which is a characteristic of faith, a characteristic that the Zohar calls matzahs mechula dehemenusa, the food of faith, a bread of faith that imbibes in a person, that connects into the person, that draws into the person. The eating of the matzah, and the matzah is a mitzvah, a commandment of Hashem, and an inherent aspect of holiness that a person draws it into inside of himself, and it becomes his flesh and blood. The mitzvah is turned into his own personal flesh and blood, and that he is incorporated a mitzvah inside of himself, herself, and it's become part of him. It's ingrained. becomes part of that. It becomes part of that DNA. But the continuation of that verse of the betrothal ends off with the words, "V'yadates Hashem," and you will know Hashem. It looks like that verse itself is a contradiction in terms. You're going to have faith, and you will know. Isn't that surely a contradiction? Faith and knowledge. If you know something, you don't need faith anymore. If you have faith, right, you're not reliant on knowledge. They are two contradictory things, but the verse joins them together. This, in fact, our sages teach us that this is an illusion of the Shavous omer period. We start off with the faith, but that faith becomes ingrained and then becomes included in your DNA, becomes included in yourself, and it grows. Just like you've gone through a spiritual growth in the period of Shavous omer. And at the conclusion of the Shavous omer, we have the Shavous, we have the offering of bread. Remember, we enunciated that the food of that the bread is a representation of a food of the intellect, of the human, of the intellectualization. So the what starts off as emunah, as faith, comes ingrained and becomes and works towards an understanding. And then when we work on this understanding, Hashem comes down on Har Sinai and gives us the Torah to complement and complete our understanding and our knowledge. And hence this represents the two loaves, which are brought at the Shavous period, at the period of the completion of the Shavous omer period. In fact, in analogies and in comparative talk, we talk about bread being the staple diet, the staple aspect of nourishment. And our understanding is that the Torah is also the Torah is God's wisdom. And as we learn the Torah, we become nourished. We take on the nourishment of intellectual understanding and connecting with Hashem, so that we no longer are no longer connecting only by faith, but we are connecting with knowledge and wisdom. And in fact, a teaching of the Rebbe's father with regard to that is very pertinent and very illuminating. The Rebbe's father taught that just like there are two loaves of bread that are given at Shavuos time, which is an indicator of two aspects in the Torah itself, based on a medrash. The Rebbe's father extends that idea, it appears. He doesn't write that exactly precisely, but that's what I personally think, right? It's an extension on this medrash, and is pointed out in some writings by other scholars. The two loaves represents from the medrash's point of view, the written Torah and the oral Torah. So two aspects of the wisdom of Hashem: what's in the written Torah and what's in what's in the oral Torah. Two loaves which show a completeness of of the the Torah. Remembering also that the Ten Commandments was given as two tablets of stone. So there's that idea of the two loaves of bread. However, the Rebbe's father brings in another illuminating point in connecting the Pesach to Shavous. We can extend that idea of the two loaves of the Medrash, that the Medrash speaks of the written Torah and the written Torah and the oral Torah. We can extend that idea that Torah itself has two modes of learning: understanding the revealed part of Torah and understanding the hidden part of Torah, the mystical side of Torah, the inner workings of connecting to Hashem in Torah. All of those teachings were given at Har Sinai, were given at the revelation of Torah, of wisdom at the time of Sinai. The revealed part and the hidden part. And we can subdivide one loaf to have two parts, because there's the written Torah and the oral Torah, but that itself comprises the revealed part of Torah. But there's also the hidden portions of Torah. There's the Torah, there's the mystical connective points of the Torah. That itself was given at Har Sinai. And this connects to, and we can see the beginnings of this, just like we saw and we discussed that the beginning of the redemption of the Jewish nation via Moshe Rabbeinu had an ultimate purpose. The purpose was that the Bnei Yisrael will come and serve Hashem at Al-Hazeh on this mountain. So also the beginning point of this period, meaning the Pesach period, we do an activity with the matzah, which shows on this same idea. What do? You will recall from the Pesach Seder that we have three matzahs on the Seder plate. The majority of the Seder is done over the middle matzah, called the Levi matzah. We call them Avram, Yitzchak, Yankov, but we call them Kohen Levi Yisrael, commonly called the Levi matzah, the middle one. And what activity do we do with that Levi matzah to speak the narrative of the Haggadah? We take the middle matzah and we split it in two, and we take one of the portions of the matzah and make that the afikoman to be eaten at the end of the Seder, or at the end of the eating section of the Seder, and we speak the narrative of the going out of Egypt, the major portion of the Haggadah, over or with that middle matzah, the Levi matzah, the other half broken and exposed. So this idea of the two halves, the exposed matzah, and then the one which is put away for later, which is hidden, reflects this same idea of the two aspects of the Torah. The revealed part of Torah, which we speak the narrative about, and and the hidden one, the application which is hidden away to be revealed at the end of the processes. Just like the teachings and wisdom of the Zohar, the mystical teachings, will be openly and understood and revealed at the times of Mashiach, when there will be the full revelation of godliness and where we will be able to see spirituality in a revealed sense. So the two halves of the matzah parallel the two loaves of bread that we have, both corresponding to these two dimensions of Torah, revealed and hidden, and exoteric and esoteric aspects of the Torah. Now let's go back to the verses of Isaiah and see that this is also reflected in that same, this idea is reflected in that same passage that we were examining. In that passage that we are examining, based on a Kabbalistic teaching of the first Chabad Rebbe, Reb Shneur Zalman, the author of the Tanya, wrote in one of his teachings in Likutei Torah, in the book called Likutei Torah, Parshas Bamidbar, on this Parshas Bamidbar, where he examines this verse, and he expresses that this verse is a teaching which has a similar connotation to this, in that the teaching expresses that the first there will be the arista chalila elam, there will be the betrothal to me, and that betrothal has to be in a way that breaks off our connection to worldly influences. In the Jewish sense, to understand that a little bit better, in the Jewish sense, we have to examine what it means to have a betrothal in the halachic sense, that is, using the reveal part of the Torah. When we talk about a bride and a bridegroom, and they decide to get married, and they go through the kedushin or erusin process, what they've done is that they've both said to each other, the color says to the man, effectively says that I'm betrothed to you, I'm makadosh to you, I am now utilizing the other word, I've now become kodesh, I've become holy to you. Kodesh in this sense means that I'm not going to be with anyone else, I'm only going to be with you. I'm dedicating myself to you. So there's a dedication one-to-one. In order to become dedicated one-to-one, you first must say that I'm putting everything else aside. How do you become dedicated to one entity, unique to one-to-one? By saying everything else is not Kodesh, right? And I am becoming Kodesh. Kodesh in another sense, we know is sanctify. We use that expression for sanctification. It's in the same sense, which we say, I devote myself to godliness. In order to devote myself to godliness, I have to negate other influences. I'm not doing this, but I'm doing this. When it comes to, certainly when it comes to the marriage proposal, it's a unique combination saying, I'm not going to connect to any other man. I'm devoting myself entirely to you. In this same point, the arastically, the the enunciation of betrothal of Hashem to the Jewish people, which happens at Har Sinai, is that I'm making myself a unique connection point to Bnei Yisrael. So Hashem says, I'm connecting you. So what are we supposed to do about it? Well, what we, the Jewish nation, have to do about it is we have to put other considerations aside. And that's the first part of the verse. Arastically, that I have to move away from a sense of materiality and move to a holy vision and expression of activity. An effective way to do this is by taking my materiality and becoming and transferring it to holy endeavors. So the continuation of the verse then goes, that is verse 21, Varastically la'elam, I'm connecting myself to you. Varastically b'tzedek, I'm connecting to you via righteousness by good practice. Embedded in that word b'tzedek is the idea of tzedakah, of giving, what we call charity, doing good deeds. Separating my materiality, my monies that I have, and connecting that to Hashem. I'm separating for that, and I'm taking what I think belongs to me because I put in a lot of self effort in order to produce this for myself, and in order to have that, I take away my hard-earned materiality as expressed by the dollars that I have, and I pass it on to other good deeds, and then continuing with, that becomes a prelude to my connecting to Hashem in prayer, which is a motivation of what we do before we start our individual prayers, that we always give some tzedakah, we give some coins in charity in order to take away from my materiality and share it with others who are less benefit, and that acts as a good motivator for myself and as a good deed for myself, and a reason why God should be listening to my prayers, because I'm connecting and helping others. So Hashem says, I will betroth you with that. And then we need to move further, and we need to move and express, move beyond, and then to the next level of connection to Hashem, which is mishpat. The verse continues with mishpat, with the idea of treating everything justly, my desires and my interactions with the world, that of removing the evil from myself by interacting in a way of Hashem, that Hashem works with the way of justice. And then we need to move to a higher realm. We need to arouse in ourselves mercy on ourselves, by understanding that we've taken our spiritualism and embedded it in to the physical world, and we're connecting with the physical world in an egotistical way. So we want to arouse within ourselves an understanding that we need to move ourselves and move up and go beyond that. And that arousal of mercy on ourselves will arouse a mercy from Hashem to actually redeem us. Notwithstanding that, we might not be able to fully achieve everything in its perfect sense. We are, after all, but human, limited, right? And we can't go to the highest realms. We might not be able, it's a difficult task to give charity in the fullest sense. It's a difficult task to be emotive and connect to others in its and to always see the positive in other things and being non-judgmental, etc., etc. Right? It's not always so easy. We have to move ahead, though. But if we contemplate in Hashem and ask for His mercy in that He will give us when we see us doing it, He will respond with that. And therefore comes that end verse that which says that Arastechli, I will betroth you in the faith that you will have. And therefore, as you progress further, you will actually know Hashem. Now, this level of knowledge is a different level of knowledge, and this is where it's a deeper interpretation that Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya, the author of Likutei Torah, it gives us this deeper level of understanding. We ask Hashem that not just to have the knowledge in an academic sense, and we are aware of this, that when we have incorporated knowledge into our world view and it becomes a knowledge that we really know, right, then that's the knowledge which is called knowing Hashem, which is the end of the verse. I had a teacher, and I always appreciate that he taught us, and he gave us so many of his personal hours, and I'm happy to say his name, Rabbi Matas Cantor, and he should be healthy and live and live long. He once gave us an analogy of this idea. He says there is Chokhmah Bina Das as expressed in the knowledge of in the understanding of how the human intellect works. The first idea, bringing it out into an intellectual understanding, and then Das, which means incorporating that in our vision. He used to talk about that you could be able to tell a child, don't put your hand next to something too warm, the heater or whatever it is, the fire, right? And a child understands that, an intellectual understanding. And then you can add it on details. There might be fire, it'll cause this sort of damage and this on. But then when the child actually, unfortunately, might touch something hot and they go, oh, and automatically your hand moves away, that's knowledge. That's a different level of knowledge. You've taken the intellectual understanding and you've incorporated in your daily activity, in the way that you interact with the world. That means taking intellectual knowledge and making it into understanding. And on the academic, and that's what we need to do in all levels in an academic sphere as well as a religious sphere. We have many people espousing good ethics all around the world, but when it comes to their own personal lifestyle, they don't necessarily seem to implement that same level of ethics and knowledge, right? So that's bringing it down into the person's own life. But this is what we say. We look at the continuation of the verse, that Hashem says He promises us that He will, if we go through these steps that we've said of the first verse of verse 21, and then culminate in verse 22, the idea of that the that I'll always connect with you because we're always doing this activity. So as we said, the activity of tzedakah, of prayer, and bringing and asking for Hashem's fill and connection with us through our own prayers, right? And through our own meditation, we connection. So therefore we go through the tzedek or mishpat. Then Hashem has the chesed, connects with us with the chesed and rachamim. That will culminate in, that's verse 21, culminate in the verse 22, barastically be'amunah, that our faith will move from a faith-based and lack of understanding to a weight of the adatas Hashem, of knowledge of Hashem, in an academic sense, as well as incorporating that in our daily lives, so that the knowledge will move down, let's say, use that analogy, move down from an intellectual understanding and then affect our actual hearts and our motion to connecting. Now, this is the idea of Shavous being reenacted every year. The idea that where we start off in Pesach with that Levi matzah, we start off with the revealed parts of our barley interaction with the world. And during the period of Surah Zayma, we develop it and we go further till the point where we've developed it and we've brought it to bearing, and it comes Shavuos, where we will have the Shtei Alechem, the two parts of the Torah given to us, and we've worked on it, joining together so that it becomes a connective point, L'olam forever. And this is the period of Shavuos. And it's an unlimited connection. We take it to where we can, but it's also an unlimited connection. One of the other great students of Chassidus, of the Maggid of Mezrich, who was then a contemporary of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Leadik, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, once said the idea that it's interesting to note by the names Atzeres of that Shavuos is called Atzeres, and the end of Sukkot is also got the name of Atzeres, and Atzeres, those Atzereses, the Shavuos and those days don't have a specific mitzvah for themselves, and he interpret that on a positive sense. The specific mitzvah teaches us and employs that there's nothing limiting the flow of Hashem. When there is a specific mitzvah, that means that godliness and holiness is channeling through a specific channel. While on Shavuos, since we're talking about the Torah, there's no specific constraint. So therefore it's open-ended. And in the same way, the blessings of godliness are open-ended. And we can achieve in this period of Shavuos open-ended blessings. And so it should be. And I wish for the both of us and everyone and for all of our connective points of all the people that were connected to us, and any person who are learning with us, and any other people that connect. We wish those sorts of blessings, that they should have a fulfillment of all those blessings. You know, interesting point, um, a conclusion. It is a traditional blessing of the rabbis of Chabad that in the Shavous period, they bless everyone, and we bless the world with this, that we should accept the Torah in a way of pnimius, in a way of inner workings. So that should actually, all the greatness should affect ourselves on a personal plane and affect us in an internal, meaningful way as well. And and that should come to its fulfillment. All good blessings. So, in an ongoing sense, that the that the spiritual influences repeat themselves on a year-by-year basis. This includes the idea of a sense of maturity and a sense of development, so that year by year, when we receive the Torah anew, we can go to a higher stage of development of these ideas. The populace of Israel, they are young and they're old and in between. And it extends laterally. There are some people who are versed in these aspects of knowledge and those aspects of knowledge. The Torah, the expression is, the Torah is wide as a sea and deep as the ocean. So there is no limit to how you can extend. And as I said at the beginning of this year, I mentioned the idea that this is the Torah which is given by God. So automatically it's infinite in its appreciation. This is the wisdom of God, which is infinite in its possibilities of appreciation and where we can take it. But on the other hand, the expression is that God came down on Mount Sinai. God came down to this world. He allowed his greatness to be embedded and his wisdom, via his wisdom, to be embedded in this world. So therefore, the Shtei Alechem is in particular chomets. Matzah is non-leaven, but the chomets is leaven, because there's a positive aspect to leaven as well. And after we've utilized and matured in our understanding and our personal development, we can then take the seemingly chomets aspects, which seemingly, for some points in time, not allowed, but we can now take them on and utilize them to the benefit of the world. Now, this argument can't be extended completely, because we'll only be able to utilize everything in this world for its best components only when Hashem himself takes away all evil from the world. As the expression is, when the time of the Messiah will come, all evil will be eradicated from the world. And hence, even today, after many cycles of Pesach and Shavous, there's still things which are not kosher. Not kosher meaning that I can't incorporate those aspects in my life. They're not kosher, right? Because I don't have the wherewithal to be able to turn them into a positive, turn them into something positive. But through the power of the Messiah, when Hashem will take away all bad from the world, then we will see that the redemptive aspects in the negativity, in the fullest sense. Unfortunately, the Jewish people have got a lot of tragic moments in their history, and we don't understand them, and we don't comprehend them. At the time when all evil will be taken out of the world, we'll be able to see godliness with our eyes, and we'll be able to understand, in some sort of sense, the holiness that's embedded in that. But in that same context, while that hasn't happened yet, we should and need to utilize everything for the good if they're inverted commas kosher. Hence, it becomes mute many of the different arguments that happen within society. Is this and this XXX or YYY, whatever we're talking about, a good thing? And they had those debates about nuclear power. They have the debates about different aspects of, within medicine, within different ethical constraints. But the idea is that once they're there and that technology exists, there are ways to utilize them for the positive. Is the internet good? Well, obviously, it's got, there are positive aspects. There are certainly negative aspects. There's certainly, huge positive aspects. Nuclear power, continuing, in hundreds of years ago, you talked about, they talked about the destructive power of electricity on them. Then there's the positive powers of electricity. That argument never ceases. The answer to that is that it is up to the human, to the human who has the godly spirit, to utilize those things for the good. Not utilize it for the bad, but utilize it for the good, not for warfare, but for enhancement of human life. So this is the progression that we make. And this is the ultimate realization of the idea that God came down and revealed his knowledge on Har Sinai, that Hashem blessed the people and made it possible that good will benefit the world, and the good and the world, the two opposite extremes, can coexist and co-integrate. As our teachers say, that the world, everything in the world was created for a purpose and exists there for a purpose, and the purpose is to use it for good. So once we've recognized it and made it available, it has to be used for its ultimate purposes of doing good. So this is this connective idea between the Pesach and the Shavous, or the offering, the barley offering, to the Shnei Alechem, to the two bread lechem, right? We have to develop and utilize for the good all the benefits that we have, and we have this specific periods in the Jewish life cycle year where we emphasize these requirements and these activities. And I think that's a blessing that we have, and we have that capability to fulfill that and we should fulfill it, and that is our role.